Hello, welcome to Introduction to Relational Psychoanalysis. This video series will be an overview of Stephen A. Mitchell's book, Relational Concepts in Psychoanalysis. So the main focus and motivation to do this video series is to give clinicians a more updated view of the field of psychoanalysis. I'm a marriage and family therapist. I've worked in the field for about 7 years now, and I've worked with a lot of different therapists, and a lot of them don't have a background in psychoanalysis, don't have much exposure to it. Obviously, they've been exposed to Freud and drive theory and maybe a little bit of object relations, but for the most part, there's very little exposure, and yet there is this great appreciation for attachment theory. And my sense is that a lot of these clinicians that really enjoy attachment theory would find great value in relational psychoanalysis, which is a more updated, more contemporary field within psychoanalysis. And so my hope is that by presenting this material, clinicians can start to appreciate the depth of this field and be able to use it in their clinical work in a way that is deeply enriching. So the main focus of this book is to provide a more integrated model of psychoanalysis. It's a model that Mitchell refers to as the relational conflict model. And the relational conflict model sees relationships as the core of our psychological life. And it puts an emphasis on the types of conflicts that relationships can create for us. And it looks at the ways in which we tend to recreate familiar relational conflicts in our day-to-day interactions with others. Now, the introduction focuses on situating Mitchell's theory within the field of psychoanalysis. So seeing the way this theory differs from others, as well as seeing what theories and concepts it draws upon. So Mitchell starts by explaining the fact that we're living in a post-Freudian era, that many post-Freudian theorists can no longer really be considered within the realm of drive theory. That a lot of these theorists, when you look at their underlying assumptions, are fundamentally relational. So he calls these relational models of psychoanalysis. And what he means by relational model is simply that they see relationships as primary, that we are primarily motivated to be close to others as well as to differentiate ourselves from others. And this is very different from Freud's drive theory, where relationships are more just derivatives of our instinctual drives, that really what is at the heart of our psychological life are these physical tensions, this libidinal tension that is seeking some type of reduction within the environment. So as the term suggests, the relational conflict model is a relational model, and yet it's important to differentiate the various relational models within the field in order to more adequately situate where relational conflict model lies. So one of the main differences among these relational models is that some are more monadic and some are more dyadic. You can also think of this monadic as one-person psychology versus two-person psychology. Now, Freud's theory you can think of as being a more kind of being on the extreme end of this monadic versus dyadic continuum. And in the sense that it stresses huge importance on the intrinsic aspects of the mind, what we are born with and what we bring into our interactions with the environment. And it sees the mind as somewhat self-contained, and then the mind clashes with the environment. Clashes, or at times the environment is able to satisfy our libidinal needs and decrease our tension. And a more relational monadic theory would be self-psychology, which it's this idea that we have these developmental needs and we're looking for the environment to mirror us. We're looking for and looking for our primary relationships to help mirror and foster this development of this internal structure of the self, the tripolar self, as Kohut called it. And this is very different from a more dyadic theory, which would look at the way in which the mind is structured by the environment. That there isn't this preformed structure that is looking to be expressed and manifested, but actually that the very structure of the mind itself is heavily influenced by how the environment responds to us and comes to constitute our very psychological structure. So Mitchell terms more monadic relational models as developmental arrest models. And the reason he uses this term is that it's a really good way of categorizing how these models view psychopathology. We have this inborn structure that is looking to be expressed, that is looking to be developed, and if there is a particular failure within our environment, that we become stunted in our development. We become arrested. And part of psychotherapy and psychoanalysis is to create an environment in which these developmental needs can be reactivated and some healing can occur. So this is contrasted with more dyadic theories within relational models. And the best examples of those would be interpersonal psychoanalysis, as well as the British School of Object Relations. And these models put great emphasis on the way in which our mind is patterned by relationships and patterned and structured by relationships, and then as well as the way in which our interactions with others have a great impact on our psychopathology, that it's not just all intrapsychic drama. But there's less emphasis within these models on self-cohesion, on our narcissistic needs. That's more within the realm of self-psychology. So now that we have these broad brushstrokes of these various theories of drive theory versus more relational models, and then more monadic relational models versus more dyadic, we can begin to situate relational conflict model. Mitchell considers relational conflict model a third option, apart from drive theory and developmental arrest models. It draws heavily on interpersonal psychoanalysis, on the British schools of object relation, but it doesn't completely abandon drive theory or the developmental arrest model. It puts a great emphasis, just like drive theory, it puts a great emphasis on internal conflict. But instead of it being between the id and the superego, it is between the conflicting demands of any given relationship. And from the developmental arrest model, it puts an emphasis on self-organization, on self-cohesion, and on the failures of the environment. As he puts it himself, quote, "Taken together, these traditions, these more relational models, make it possible to view all psychodynamic phenomena within a multifaceted relational matrix, which takes into account self-organization," so that's developmental arrest models, self-psychology, attachment to others, objects, that's from object relations, interpersonal transactions, which would be interpersonal psychoanalysis, and the active role of the analysand, or the client, in the continual recreation of his subjective world, end quote. So there you have it. There is how Mitchell is situating his model within the field. And that word that he uses, relational matrix, it's going to be the focus of the next video, in the next chapter. But I want to spend a little bit of time just diving into the implications of this term. And this has a lot to do with integrating the more dyadic theories we discussed, the British School of Object Relations, as well as interpersonal psychoanalysis. Because there is a dichotomy within those two fields that Mitchell wants to transcend, and that's between just the word interpersonal and the word intrapsychic. The word interpersonal has this, the connotation is about actual interactions with others, these transactions that is the main focus of interpersonal psychoanalysis. And then we have the intrapsychic life, that is the focus of object relations, looking at these internalized relational configurations that were patterned from our childhood. And there is this, and the dichotomy is between how much of our interpersonal interactions, how much of our interpersonal interactions are due to our intrapsychic life, and how much of it is an actual perception and reaction to what is happening and what we're experiencing from the other person. And the idea of the concept of relational matrix is to get a perspective that there is this mutual interaction between the interpersonal transaction and our intrapsychic life, that they both influence and structure the other. So what is happening, what is actually happening interpersonally affects us intrapsychically, and what is happening for us intrapsychically is influencing us interpersonally. So we're going to dive more into that concept in the next video. Thank you.